Grant, great to have you here today. Thank you very much.
It's good to be here.
Porsche keeps you young, obviously. You've been with the brand more than 3 decades. When and how you came to Porsche, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Boxster wasn't your first project, right?
That's correct. I first came to Porsche in 1989 after 3 years at Audi, and Audi in Munich, and had some good friends that were working at BMW Technik, and I heard through the rumor grapevine was that Dr. Ulrich Beetz, as well as Harm Lagai, will be leaving BMW Technik and coming to start something new at Porsche, and I became very interested, and that's what drew me to Porsche. It took a long while before we began something that really took hold. And the first project, one of them was the 944 facelift, which eventually became the 968, as well as the 989.
When you joined Porsche in 1989, the company wasn't in a healthy situation. What was your view of the company, especially as a young designer at age 32?
Well, at that time, the designers, you always look at places where a lot of things are going on. At that time, it was in Japan, there was a lot of things going on, a lot of show cars, a lot of development. There's a little bit less going on in Europe, and the least was happening at Porsche. Porsche was known in the industry from a design standpoint as a company which just facelifted a model for decades, and that was really not a proper job for a designer there. That was the feeling back then.
Let's start with the concept car. You were a very small design team. Can you tell me a little bit about the process? How did you work together?
Yeah. Well, when we first started the Boxster, of course, we were a bit down because the 989 had just been canceled. That was in around the end, middle or fall of 91 or so. But we knew something new was coming. So when we first started with the idea of the Boxster, of course, together with the 911, it was an exciting moment for us because you're switching from a front-engine 4-seater Porsche to a mid-engine 2-seater Porsche. So the emotions were quite high. You also had, as far as the overall feeling at the time, there was a lot of hope that this time we were going to get it right. So as a designer always says, the first idea starts with a sketch, a pencil and a piece of paper, and that's basically how it all started. And of course, once you have it sketched out, this is before any type of digital modeling or anything, you work with a modeler, and you basically just tell them how it should look, and then it just sort of all falls together. That's in a nutshell.
Okay, because it sounds so easy. You just mentioned it. How did you draw the inspiration for the Boxster?
Yeah, well, Porsche has a very strong mid-engine history going way back. But if you stick with just the roadsters and leave off the early stuff from the 30s, there's a lot of gorgeous cars that we had produced, the 550 being the first racing-specific Porsche, specifically intended for racing, and its successor, which is 718 RSK, and of course, don't forget the 914. So Porsche had a lot of mid-engine history to build on.
To come back to the process, did you go from pen and paper renderings to clay model, or how?
Well, sort of. These days we have a real digital process, and there's a lot of things that take place on computers. But it doesn't seem like that was that long ago. But still, it seems like nearly 25 years ago, is that the whole process was very analog. So I was really lucky to have an older gentleman who had a lot of experience in automotive, like clay modeling. All our models at the beginning are made out of clay, and instead of having to draw sections on a wall and these big giant tape drawings, I think some people are familiar with, where you're taking X, Y, Z coordinates and putting them on the car, and then after 2 weeks, you think you might have something you like. This guy just said, well, Grant, just give me a sketch. How you want this car to look. So I'm going oh, okay, this is a different system. So So I plastered the walls with all these drawings that how I imagined the car could look, and of course talked to my boss, and you have a lot of inspiration from the other teams and everything. And so one by one, we went through those sketches, and with the Harm the guy at the time, and we put little red dots on each of the areas of those sketches that we thought that could become the new Boxster. And then this Peter Muller, the guy, he just walked up to it and looked at the drawing, went over to the clay model and started sculpting it with this thing which looks like cheese graters, and the car just sort of blossomed from his hands. Not only from my sketches, but from his hands. It was an excellent process, very good memories of that.
Sounds great, yes. How did the crisis influence your work? Did you feel under pressure, or was it the other way around?
Oh, terribly, yeah. Well, after the demise of the 989, you had even more. You think, well, how are we going to, kind of set foot, and how are we going to get things going? We have to have a hit because you have the responsibility of resurrecting the company. It's not only you yourself as a reputation. You don't look at it like that, or your department. You just look at the whole company. It was very important for us to make the very best out of this opportunity, and I think we did. We worked really hard. We put ourselves under a lot of pressure, and eventually we managed.
So how would you describe how was the atmosphere at that time within the team, the design team?
Well, it was two different atmospheres. There was the people who had been there longer and that had seen a few failed attempts, and like Horst Marchart was saying, we had some management changes, so that brought an additional insecurity. But at the same time, you had this vision that this new 911 developed together with the new Boxster could really become something. So with that thought, it kind of gave us drive.
Great. Can you show us some highlights on the concept car?
Well, I'll try to explain very briefly. I'll probably need an hour for this, but I'll do my best. But basically, anytime we describe a design, it's all about it's the proportions and the feeling, the overall feeling that the car gives. In the case of the Boxster, whether it's a Boxster, the old one, the new one, back to the 550s or 718 RSKs, it's like this inherent form language that we always build upon, always in a more modern way. In the case of this Boxster, what we typical of a mid-engine car, mid-engine proportions, it's a longer wheelbase. The cabin is a little bit further forward, and you have, of course, these wonderfully sculpted fender bulges, what do you want to call them? Low bonnet, and continuing off to the side. We had a lot of sculpture going on the side. This is before we knew we had to carry over a lot from the 996. In the interior, there's about 2 hours worth of explanation to go into this thing, but basically the idea is from Stefan Stark. We worked in tandem on that, and the idea was to bring a little bit of more body color into the car and to have a driver-oriented seating. So the car is basically asymmetrical. So you have a tighter seating position with these side bolsters that hold onto your hips. On the passenger side, it's a little bit more relaxed with a little bit more space because all they have to do is hang on. With all kinds of wonderful little details. And one of the ones that's most famous, that it sticks in everyone's minds since 1993, are the moving ventilator fans. Those unfortunately did not make it into production. But going towards the back, it's the similar what I was saying before, the low rear deck and the higher fenders, just to give it the feeling of a real tightness. I always referred to, whether it's a Boxster or some of the early predecessors, it's like it's a car where its body is sort of stretched over the car's mechanical components. So it keeps the fenders kind of like sticking out in wheels and showing the wheels real strongly.
Cool. Unfortunately, it was also the time saving or reducing costs. What contribution did you make in the design to help reducing the costs?
Yeah, as we know that every development of a product in a team, you're not as a designer doing your own personal dream, but you're working with a team. The car has to be produced, it has to be marketed, it has to be manufacturable. In the case of the Boxster, we have several carryover parts from the 996. That was very important to take over. In the case of the The packaging, we were required for safety reasons to, of course, integrate a roll bar, which is kind of like a no-brainer, and to make some of the areas of the car a little bit more voluptuous, a little bit bigger to accept the radiators, which come from the 996, as well as have like a proper trunk, front and rear. So those are the compromises that changed the package. One small compromise, I wouldn't say a compromise, but it was very important that we were, as the project was developing, we were looking more and more how to save even more costs. So what we learned from previous projects, also like the 989, we had to put into this car, for example, this so-called modular headlamp. And that saved us a lot of money because not only of getting all the functions in one element, but also to make it very easy and fast, especially fast to produce. Because time on the production line was also money.
Yes. To me, it looks still timeless. Wonderful concept car. The production version of the Boxster remains surprisingly close to the concept study.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about it and show us some examples?
Well, we did our best to translate as much of the show car into the production car. And like I was talking before about making a few compromises, it's a part of life, that's what it's about. But we think we maintained a lot of the character from the show car into the production car, mainly being like the higher fenders. We call this, even on today's cars, the topography of the car, where you have the higher fenders and the lower bonnet carrying through to the lower windscreen. The Boxster windscreen, of course, is lower than the 996, more of a sporty feel. Side intakes, of course, are a little bit different than the show car, but I think everyone heard that story. If not, we can get into that again. Show car did not have a roof. Here we have a proper roof for the everyday use thing and a proper trunk, and of course a rear spoiler. One thing I'm quite happy about on the Boxster is that you're always looking for things from the past that you could develop into the future, like these iconic elements from the previous Spyders, which is the central, they call it in English, called pea shooter exhaust pipe, and because of the way the engine was laid out and the two cylinder banks come together in these exhaust pipes and they exit in the middle. That's something we had in the show car and also managed to get that in the production car.
You just mentioned the 550. How did tradition, and maybe still does, impact the design for the Boxster?
Yeah, the 550 is famous for a lot of reasons. It's an iconic car that's shown up in a lot of films. Of course, the whole James Dean story and everything. It's that basic form philosophy carried to a new era. It's the low bonnets, front and rear, and the higher fenders. Round elements in the headlamps, lowish windscreen. It's all those little characteristics we like to carry in.
The Boxster was expected to be an honest Porsche. What would you say? How did you achieve this claim?
Honest.
Honest.
Well, I think honest is a good way to express. So like keeping a car and its design authentic. Authenticity is one of my favorite words, and that everything is there for a specific reason and a function. So what you're doing is basically taking that stylistically to a new level to make it so like sporty and dynamic.
Which details about the Boxster do you like best, and why?
I think if you want to focus on one detail, it's that central exhaust, because we had it in our past, and we brought it up into the future, and nobody else had it.
Last question from my side. How do you look back on the project today?
I look back on the project as if it was a very tough time. I think it's one of those things when you're younger, you have nothing better to do but to work like crazy and try to establish your career, but at the same time, it was very important to do something for Porsche as a company, and it was a great honor. Great honor.
Great honor. Thank you, Grant, for your insights.